Hey everybody, welcome back to the NC State Insider Podcast. I'm your host and lead beat writer, Tucker Sennett, joining you here as always to discuss all things NC State men's basketball as the transfer portal rips on here. I just want to kind of run through things quickly, where things stand with some guys entering the portal, as well as some updates to NC State staff. Of course, you can find all of this information on our website where we have articles covering all of this stuff already. But sometimes it's easier to just simplify it and throw it in a podcast for you to hit all the essential points without diving in too deep. So we'll start with the portal. NC State's up to 7 guys that have hit the portal so far. Started with Cole Kloer, who never played a game for NC State as a freshman. Then you have Matt Abel, talented freshman, Colt Langdon, Jamie Kontu-Nuemi, Paul McNeil Jr., the big domino, obviously, and Terrence Arsenault, and finally Alan Breed went in on Thursday, the day of this recording. So that's 7 guys that are in. The big losses, obviously, being at this point Abel and Paul McNeil. Terrence Arsenault also a fairly significant loss in terms of your defensive identity, but I would say the majority of these exits were somewhat expected, even if Will Wade had stayed. So nothing major for Justin Gainey outside of McNeil going in the portal, although it seems as though that might be more of an exploratory measure than anything else. He might be just trying to gauge his value to return to NC State potentially, or maybe he really does want to explore other options and not play for a third head coach at NC State, which is completely understandable. If you're Paul McNeil, that's a lot of turnover in one place and a lot of things changing all around you every year. So I do understand if he's looking for a fresh start, but I also do believe that NC State can be competitive in offering him another shot with the Wolfpack. And I think they want to. I think he's a super valuable bridge player and could be a guy that if he were to stay, a guy that could see his jersey hung in the rafters if all goes well in his junior season. He's a really, really impressive player, really, really impressive human being, by all accounts, and obviously would be a big loss for the program that Justin Gainey is trying to build here. As for targets, NC State is hosting one of its big portal targets, Christian Hammond, a talented guard from Santa Clara. Gainey dipping into that Herb Sendek relationship that well. Obviously, Gainey played for Herb Sendek at NC State. So, I could see him sort of building this roster out of a mixture of guys from Santa Clara and a couple guys from Tennessee, and then filling in around those guys who have familiarity with the coaching trees that he's been a part of. There's going to be elements of what Herb Sendek has done at Santa Clara. Gainey was a part of that briefly. And then obviously parts of what he did at Tennessee, especially on the defensive end. So there might be some guys that come over from Tennessee, maybe a Bishop Boswell, maybe one of those big men from over there that can come in and translate what Gainey wants to do on that end of the floor fairly successfully, similar to what Quadir Copeland did for Will Wade this past season. And that turned out to be a really, really valuable role for this Wolfpack team in more ways than one. So those are some names to monitor for now. Obviously, a lot of smoke going on in the portal. JP Estrella off the board, committed to Michigan today. So that's one of those Tennessee guys that will not be coming to NC State. I know I included him in an article, just doing my due diligence in some ways there, because that was a guy that Gainey did coach and would have been a candidate for a role at NC State, but obviously decided to go a different direction with things. So that brings us to the staff here. 3 additions in the last couple of days. Um, the big one for me, at least, just because I think it fills such a huge need for experience on this coaching staff, is Matt Driscoll, who served as the associate head coach at Kansas State this past season before taking over for Jerome Tang when he was relieved of his duties and acting as the interim head coach. Driscoll is a veteran of the coaching ranks. He was at North Florida. I'm sure everybody has seen that clip by now, of him, that March Madness clip at the first four. That's kind of a classic. And he was at North Florida for 16 years, was a really, really successful head coach there who, wanted to get his hat in the power conference basketball with Kansas State, and is a really bright offensive mind, and is also an older voice for this staff. Gainey has never been a head coach before. That's been well documented at this point. So, there was some serious uncertainty there about this NC State staff, and how it would approach things. And Driscoll answers a lot of those questions. This is a guy who knows what it takes to run a program. He knows what it takes to coach an offense. Kansas State was a really, really high profile, high octane offensive team with some big, big scorers in PJ Haggerty and some other guys, Abdi Bashir, um, who had success that just didn't glue together in the way that Jerome Tang hoped for and ultimately led to his demise, um, from a coaching perspective. And Driscoll, I don't know if he'll be. I think it'll come down to kind of a group effort between he and one of the other additions to the coaching staff as to who sort of puts this offense together, because I think Gainey will have a say, obviously, but I think he's going to focus more in terms of like his hands-on coaching on the defensive end, because that's what his background is. And I think he'll be involved heavily with the defensive side of things, as well as sort of the developmental side of things with the guards. So Driscoll should help with the offense, and then just providing that veteran voice in the locker room and in the coaches' offices. Then you have Anthony Goines. I'm guessing that's how that's pronounced. I don't want to butcher that, but if I did, feel free to message me or whatever. I apologize. Goines is a successful assistant coach at Georgia who has decided to come over. Um, a another guy who this is the guy who I think will be the sort of um, offensive coordinator for NC State, with Driscoll sort of as his aide in a lot of ways. And Goins was the second guy who was hired because NC State brought over Riley Collins from Tennessee. So there's already a face in the coaching staff. Sorry, sentences aren't coming out normally today, but Goins will be the offensive guru for this team. He did a really, really nice job at Georgia this past year, putting together a fairly high profile offense built around some nice players like Jeremiah Wilkinson and Somto Cyril, the 7-footer that I don't think is on the table for NC State, but I'm sure the potential of bringing over a player or two from Georgia was talked about during this hiring process. I think he will likely end up elsewhere, but there's a guy like Jeremiah Wilkinson over there that scored quite a bit per game, 17.4 points. So, maybe if things with McNeil go sour, that's a guy who can come in and immediately fill the void of your production pretty easily. So, I also think it's good to get another SEC voice in this coaching staff because I do think that NC State is going to try and play a different style of basketball rather than kind of fitting the ACC mold. They're going to come in, try to play more physical and bully teams as much as possible. Whether that's successful or not, I don't know. That kind of remains to be seen. But I do think there's going to be a different approach to things. They want to establish a distinct identity, and that a lot of that identity is going to stem from Gainey's time in the SEC, Goins' time in the SEC, and the fourth member of the coaching staff that's been added um, from Kentucky, and I'm blanking Alvin Brooks the third. Sorry, still brain's not totally working tonight, but Alvin Brooks the third has joined the staff as well, reportedly associate head coach at Kentucky under Mark Pope. They've had some coaching turnover after an up and down season. This is a guy who was with Baylor for its national championship run a few years ago, and a guy that is really going to help on the recruiting side of things. Brooks was integral in the recruitment of guys like VJ Edgecombe at Baylor. Was really really effective in the transfer portal with Kentucky over the last year. Brought in some really nice pieces for Mark Pope that blossomed into quality players, and obviously he's going to be a kind of right hand man for Gainey in the recruiting side of things, while also providing some important coaching staff type things. So I think Gainey's checked all the boxes at this point. He's got a player development guy in Riley Collins, full-time assistant. He's got a recruiting full-time assistant in Brooks. He's got a offense guy in Goins, and then finally he has kind of that veteran voice and voice of reason on the bench in Driscoll, who can be sort of his energy guy. That he's got a lot of juice, and certainly can help Gainey kind of fire things up when needed. And so that is a really well-rounded coaching staff. I think everybody's going to have very well-defined roles, and I think Gainey will let everybody kind of do what they're good at rather than sort of butting his head into issues that might not be working. And I'm not, this is purely from the outside looking in, but I think NC State in this past year had some issues with the cohesion at times of the coaching staff. I think there were plans that went wrong, and I think anybody watching this team can realize that the defensive plans certainly didn't work for a lot of the season, and I think that was sort of a combination of some player mismanagement as well as some miscommunication on the coaching staff as to what they wanted to do. And I don't anticipate that being much of an issue this season. What happens next? This roster needs to come together. The portal for basketball moves much slower than it does for football. I've talked about this already. There's not those same academic deadlines that need to be met. And, these guys have time to figure things out. They have time to visit schools. But getting that first win in the portal will go a long way in sort of boosting the morale around the program. And it might also help in the retention for guys like McNeil. Like if you bring in a true point guard that McNeil sees highlights of or whatever, knows him and realizes, oh, this is a guy that can really help me in the same way that Quadir Copeland helped me, he might be obligated to stay in that sense. So, we'll see how that goes. Maybe they get Hammond and Boswell in the building here soon. Hammond is the first visit. I'll get a story on that out on Friday, but Things are moving quickly. That's kind of the gist of it. And we'll have you covered here at NC State on SI on all things NC State men's basketball throughout the rest of transfer portal season. Feel free to throw me a follow on X at Senate Tucker, and we'll keep it going for you. Catch you next time.